Uh, Assalamu alaikum. So this is today's second keynote speech, which will be presented by Professor Dr. Mehmet Asutay. So firstly, I will make a brief introduction about him, and then he will start his presentation, which has the title of Islamic Political Economy, Islamic Moral Economy, Imagination, Ideas, Concepts, and Theory Making. Professor Asutay has a BA in Public Finance from the University of Istanbul, continued for MSc in Public Finance at the University of Istanbul as well. Then he has postgraduate diploma in Economic and Social Policy Analysis from University of York. MA in Economics of Public Policy, Department of Economics of the University of Leicester, then PhD in Political Economics from University of Leicester as well. His research areas are Islamic political economy, Islamic moral economy, Islamic banking, finance and management, political economy of development in the Middle East, including Turkish political economy and Kurdish political economy. Currently, he is the director of Darham Center for Islamic Economics and Finance, and he is the program director for MSc in Islamic Finance and MSc in Islamic Finance and Management at Darham University. He is also the honorary treasurer of the British Society for Middle Eastern Studies and International Association for Islamic Economics. So welcome, Professor, for today's keynote speech, for accepting it. The floor is yours.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, Hafsa. Dr. Hafsa, for introducing me. It is good to be part of this conference, although it is online. I have been involved with the conference since 2000 when we organized the fourth conference in Loughborough University in the UK. And since then have been an active partner of this process. And I'm grateful for the organizers in a short period of time to be able to put the entire conference on the online system. It is indeed different times, and different times requires different responses, and Sabahattin Zaim University successfully have responded to that by providing this new ways of communicating, which has become the new norms. And before starting, I would like to send my salute to great founding fathers of Islamic economics movement. Those people in 1940s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, as the founding father of Islamic economics, they put the courage together to start this movement. And that moment has given us the light that we have been shedding on and trying to develop. And their courage, their imagination is particularly important. And therefore, my gratitude for their amazing contribution, despite the terrible adverse political economic conditions of the time. They had the courage to be able to give us this imagination to develop. And in particular, Khurshid Ahmed, Najatullah Siddiqui, Chapra, Mohammed Chapra, Mohammed Omar Chapra, Najatullah Siddiqui, as I mentioned, Zarqa, and others in particular should be recognized for their courage, as well as providing us this important heritage. And also just want to acknowledge last week, one of the important stars of the Turkish scenery of Islamic economics, Sabri Orman, Professor Sabri Orman has passed away. Our, of course, prayers for his soul, but also we recognize his contribution to this amazing area of Islamic economics, what I call it as Islamic moral economy and Islamic political economy. Now, I'm very much passionate about the subject area of Islamic political economy and Islamic moral economy. And I was happy that Dr. Sami Suwailim provided the initial thoughts for me to develop on the subject matter that I am working on now with you. And Islamic political economy or Islamic economy, Islamic moral economy ideas are important for us to consider in order to overcome the current problems that we are facing all over the world. And therefore, for me, following this imagination that has been put forward by the founding fathers, but taking it further rather than considering a stagnant idea, developing necessary concepts and theories to take the discourse to further. And in doing that, of course, the current problems that we are facing all over the world has given us another momentum why things have to change, a different turn has to develop. And that is very much my concern as well. When we are looking at the global problems in the world, in particular the COVID-19, but immediately after the COVID-19 or within the COVID-19, what we are perceiving is a huge problem. And that problem is the, again, commodification of certain part of the humanity. As we can see, the issue started in the United States with the Black Lives Matter movement. But of course, before that, COVID, and before that, environmental crisis, and etc., the financial crisis. So one crisis, another, each one of these crises is a direct indication that the current political economy is not working. And in particular with the COVID, we have seen that stoicism doesn't work. In other words, maximization of my own utility, my own health, as Dr. Suwailem has mentioned as well, is not enough for us to be able to survive. So any one of us, any individual's health and future and the sustainability, as we can see, is linked to other people's health and sustainability. And that is very much the whole discourse of Islamic moral economy, of course, of the moral economies, but in particular, the Islamic moral economy. And therefore, as opposed to individualistic stoicism, now we are talking about the meliorism or the socialization, the importance of considering other people's health as well as the well-being as part of individual well-being function. So individual well-being functions now is a function of other people's well-being is clearly identified. In particular with COVID, I cannot just be healthy unless the other people are healthy too. And therefore, the human behavior, the organizational behavior, as well as the public policy, one way or another, has to reflect such realities for us. Now, that brings us the whole new definitions of who is human and what are the consequent human behavior in the process. Dr. Suwailem has gone through certain conceptions through the public good and looking at the game theories and also reflecting on Islamic finance. I think looking at therefore my topic is imagination, the imagination that we inherited from the founding fathers with the promise of developing. I feel that we have become terribly stagnant because one way or another, these definitions, these theoretical formulations, and the applications of those formulations, unfortunately, have not been concluded, not forget concluding, but we have not gone further in order to develop them. And therefore, such as opposed to stoicistic individual, the Islamic definition of human, with the objective of falah, subject to ihsan, entirely a socializing individual concept is embedded in the nature of Islamic moral economy and Islamic political economy. However, we have been forcing ourselves either Islamizing economics, which by definition, economics by definition directly refers to maximizing an efficiency, but the results that we have come up with only Islamic finance. And Islamic finance, unfortunately, squeezed itself within the efficiency understanding of economics, but the sociality that as we have seen and as mentioned again by Dr. Suwailem, market is not an embedded, disembedded reality. It is embedded in the relations, the social formation of the societies in which we are operating. Therefore, looking at a new imagination is heavily necessary. And therefore, a criticism to all of us, including myself, that we have put all our eggs, unfortunately, the Islamic banking and finance related empirical research, developing necessary frames, theories, and ideas and the concepts in relation to, unfortunately, the moral economy, the Islamic political economy, or Islamic economics, if I have to use, unfortunately, has not taken place. I am looking at this conference, for instance, heavily dominated by papers in Islamic finance related empirical studies, which is important and necessary. But at the same time, it is important for us as part of these ideas, developing ideas, how we can contribute to development of imagination so that we have something different, something new, something to produce a particular framework which can ease the tensions that we have between people, between different classes, different segments of the society, between individual and environment, between capital and the labor, and etc. Unfortunately, that discourse is not coming out, although there's a huge expectation and huge demand out there, which is asking us to bring that out. And therefore, it is important for us to consider. And therefore, as part of this imagination, unfortunately, when we look at with the domination of Islamic banking, finance, and business research, we have not been able to contribute to developing the necessary frames to ease the tensions that we have in our countries, as well as being a hope for the rest of the world. And therefore, this economics understanding, we have squeezed ourselves. We have taken the economics as granted, and we have not been able to go beyond that to develop our structures, even the empirical studies that we are conducting without a narrative, we are squeezed within that. And therefore, looking at the whole Islamic economics movement as a post-colonial discourse, as a post-colonial intellectual movement, which aimed at developing a particular counter-hegemony through cognitive knowledge system of Islam. And that cognitive knowledge system of Islam with its normative world aims at developing the system of political economy in which a systemic response is provided to develop what is called economy, but within a political economy, within an iqtisad understanding. And that iqtisad directly is a different connotation, because iqtisad in Arabic, when we look at as different connotation, directly suggests a political economy rather than an economics, an efficiency-oriented economics. And therefore, looking at, again, the contribution of the founding fathers, and I have been going through my library in this COVID-19 times, looked at all the old conferences we had as the association conferences. And I looked at how they were very much concerned, those papers in the first conference, the second and third, the fourth conference, how theoretical imaginations were considered as important to provide this knowledge base, the systemic response, the articulation of the cognitive knowledge of Islam, and to develop a theory, a system of Islamic economics. Why? Because very much the Gramscian understanding of the founding fathers with the objective of creating this historical block, the intellectual historical block, to say that's enough. Now there is a new discourse here. And that discourse, as part of this historical block, unfortunately, with us entirely putting our eggs into Islamic economy, Islamic finance, Islamic banking, that imagination, unfortunately, has been blocked. I feel that we have betrayed that historical block, that imagination of that historical block. And that historical block, when we look at the counter-hegemony, the idea of generating a counter-hegemony, such as in the case of Sayyid Qutb, when he referred to Jahiliyyah in order to develop that imagination. Or when we look at Ali Shariati, when he talks about and creates the issue of the Islamic political economy between the narrative of the Cain and the Abel. So therefore, those stories are important for us to provide the necessary articulation of the cognitive knowledge system of Islam. In other words, in a Paulinian sense, Islamic economics very much the moment emerged to rescue human, land, even capital from domination and to be dominated. The how human has been relegated to labor only, even to that extent, as we can see, the extent of exploitation even commodified everything that we have around us, environment and everything has been commodified. And therefore, Islamic economics movement is a rescuing process, rescuing human, land, even capital from domination and to be dominated from. Because at the end of the day, through the Tawhidi understanding, Islamic cognitive knowledge system rejects any kind of domination. At the end of the day, Tawhid just directly requires the unity of Allah and therefore rejects all the domination. And therefore, when we look at, in order to be able to develop a systemic responses, whatever we have, a systemic responses, to develop a systemic responses to the problems that we have to develop a political economy of system, an iqtisadi understanding. That iqtisad understanding only would give us the political economy framework to be able to tackle our issues. Therefore, for instance, when you look at Muhammad Bakr al-Sadr's contribution into Islamic political economic contribution, he would suggest that we cannot just isolate issues, as the classical economics have isolated economic issues from sociology, politics, anthropology, and etc. Just isolated problem is being taken, but that partial analysis doesn't solve the problem. And therefore, we do not have the right to be able to isolate under the Islamic economics and finance the issues from the larger dimensions, from the larger box or the integrated analysis to make it simple. No, the issue has to be complicated. With the complication, we can only see how whatever we are doing has certain consequences. Therefore, looking at Islamic finance, of course, is an amazing story. But when we look at the consequences, because we have divorced Islamic finance entirely from the larger political economic consequences, unfortunately, the expectations that we have from Islamic finance is not producing the consequences that we were hoping to. And therefore, in order to have this general system of Islam, how that affects every aspect of life, Islamic economics have to be, and Islamic economy has to be located within that larger general system of Islam or the cognitive knowledge system of Islam, so that we can see how the interaction is taking place, what aspects is working, what aspects are not working, so that we can have a realistic understanding of what is happening for instance, in Islamic finance. So rather than having a piecemeal analysis, cutting from the other parts of the larger system understanding, unfortunately, the result will not be. And therefore, the partial analysis that we bring to our research, as well as the practice that we have around us in terms of Islamic economics and finance, it only creates hybridities, rather than reflecting the Islamic objectives and the consequences that we accept, unfortunately. But the problem with hybridity, of course, it provides a comfort zone. We are happy that we have achieved, such as the Sharia compliant finance is available. But what consequences that Sharia compliant finance produces, unfortunately, we are not tackling that part of the story. As long as it is Sharia compliant, as long as form is constituted, the rest seems to be doesn't matter. However, as we can see, pandemics as we have today and the other issues, these are systemic issues and requires system-based responses. And therefore, it is important for us to consider. I mean, look at the world economy, the largest economy in the world, which produces the most significant, highly technological war machines to be able to kill people, but could not even protect their health workers. And that's the reality, that's the substance-related issue that we have in front of us. And therefore, the debate, Sharia compliant versus the Islamic base, is an important debate for us to consider in understanding the issues and looking at how hybridity should not create this lazy attitude with us, and that we are happy now because we have a solution. No, that solution is not directly reflecting the authentic outcomes, and therefore the major problem with hybridity hybridity, it prevents the search for authenticity. Hence, our objective should be looking beyond how we can develop the authenticity. The Islamic economics movement, by definition of emergence, it was very much search for authenticity as part of this post-colonial understanding. Therefore, we have to continue to look at how authenticity can be reached. Although we know that the reaching is a process, it's a becoming process, and that is what we need to look into. And therefore, rather than losing this big picture of the political economy, the systemic understanding, just squeezing ourselves to the imposed reality of finance and how we can make the available finance Islamic, unfortunately, it creates the hybridity and prevents the new generation of people working in Islamic finance practice or working in the academia and the research to be squeezed into this hybridity, to be confined in that hybridity. And therefore, we need to be reflective, to look into what are the promises that we have, and what are the concept or expectations from that promise, so that we can rescue the process. Perhaps in order to, knowing that this is an online lecture, looking at the perhaps some figures or some pictures, as we have now come to accustomed, unfortunately, through our social media, which makes understanding easier. So when we look at, for instance, here, what are the major problems that we are facing? Okay, capitalism, the dominance, it doesn't allow others to be able to have access. Therefore, how we can move, at least bring certain equality, going beyond that equality, providing certain justice so that the accessibility can be possible. But the reality even worse than that, as we can see on the right side of the picture, some of us are even in the negative, not on even the ground, as opposed to the domination that we have. And therefore, providing equality doesn't solve the problem. However, our issue, therefore, how we can give accessibility. And therefore, if you have Islamic finance, if the Islamic finance is working with the same efficiency understanding, unfortunately, we won't be able to solve the problem that we have in front of us. And therefore, we are all happy that Islamic finance has been successful. It has been an imagining story despite all the odds, all the political economic problems. But it has been successful by giving up the objective function, how to bring this person, he's in the negative or she's in the negative, to certain level of achievement. And that, unfortunately, we have not been able to do that because we are replicating. And our research as well has been very much related to what we have around us, but how we can generate new ideas so that we can contribute to the whole ideal of how we can rescue human, how we can make their lives better. In other words, even going beyond, okay? Because as you can see on the right-hand side of this picture here from social media, the whole objective, you can provide the equity, but the whole objective is why the existing system creates barriers. Therefore, the Islamic economics and Islamic political economy aims at overcoming the barriers in accessibility. Why these barriers have been erected in front of the available resources that in our case created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, this brings us the whole important Islamic moral economic questions. And therefore, when we look at, for instance, the whole consequence of Islamic finance have been heavily financializing. The financial sphere, the financing goes from Islamic finance, the financial sphere is becoming dominant. The particular areas that are financed, again, contributing to heavy financialization rather than rescuing. And therefore, when we look at, for instance, composition again, we see that whole financialized instruments are dominating. And therefore, we have to go beyond to remember what is finance. At the end of the day, for us, finance is only an instrument to facilitate, not to create accumulation, not to create domination. But unfortunately, the whole idea, for instance, with the riba prohibition, the riba is prohibited not to be utilized in an instrumental manner to create the structure to produce the same outcomes as the conventional finance is doing. And this is not my wisdom. When you look at Ibn Qayyim, the centuries ago, he has noticed that this might happen. And this is happening, unfortunately. We have been essentializing finance as finance, finance for the sake of finance, rather than considering finance with the whole objective of making a difference. And therefore, that requires a particular way we understand what is available around us. And that requires a particular definition. When we look at the definition of Islamic economics, whatever the definition we take, it refers to justice. It refers to justice. And therefore, the Arabic word iqtisad, when we look at, either it refers to justice, equilibrium, equable in the society. And therefore, our objective cannot be efficiency-oriented economics, as we have been confining ourselves with. We have to go beyond. And therefore, time is an issue. Therefore, I just want to share an important issue that I feel strongly that we have to work around. Therefore, we are talking about this Islamic moral economy. It is very much the embeddedness. In other words, economy is not isolated from the social realities in which the society operates. The cultural norms, the religion, the relationships determines the economy. Economy has to be embedded. In other words, it is not a reality in itself. It is directly determined by the social norms of the society. And therefore, the prices cannot determine everything, but everything that determines prices. And that understanding, unfortunately, has been lost. And the whole Islamic economics aimed at bringing back the embedded economy, and therefore how fictitious commodities can be overcome, how commodification could be overcome, how real economy can be essentialized, how reciprocity is considered an important factor. And therefore, when we look at each society, each civilization, each social formation produce a particular modes of production, because each civilization or each philosophy has a particular worldview. That particular worldview is expressed through a system, and that system is identified with its social formation, and that social formation directly determines modes of production. In other words, how the production takes place, how different stakeholders comes together, okay? And then how the value theory is established, and then how the distribution that can happen. In other words, the modes of production determines who has the labor, who has the capital, who has the relationship, what kind of relationship between all these different stakeholders. And that's important for us to consider as part of this order understanding. In other words, Islamic order ontology would directly refers to Tawhid. Tawhid articulates itself as emancipating and empowering individual as an objective function that will lead to a worldview. And in that worldview, we would perceive everything around us privilege, and therefore falah for human and ihsan for society. That will result in a social formation. It's an embedded social formation that will be resulting into an economic system. And that economic system is expressed through modes of production, the social formation, the value theory, and the distribution. Therefore, looking at that will happen, of course, the whole idea of the modes of production. Therefore, when we look at the Islamic, within the Islamic political economy, the whole idea of the modes of production suggests that all stakeholders have to be treated equally to prevent domination. Therefore, riba is prohibited to prevent the domination of capital on the others. So capital is decentered through the riba prohibition, so that we develop a relationship between the equals. Value is constituted by all the participants and not only by capital, for instance. In order to understand, perhaps I will just quickly show you this, such as capitalist production functions suggest that production can be possible with the participation of capital and labor. Capital will get the alpha, labor gets whatever left. So it is domination of capital. Labor is defined through capital. And in this relationship, of course, labor is a function of capital. Capital determines. When we look at the Marxists, however, Marxists would determine everything through the labor value, still commodify labor. And capital, of course, is a communal capital. However, when we look at the Islamic production function, what you will see, one, the human is no longer a labor. but the human effort can be bought and sold, but not the human. Human cannot be commodified. And land, environment, society, and other stakeholders, depending on the nature of society, will be part of this production function. And if you look at the, if you can see properly, the attached return for each one of them, while in the capitalist modes of production, everything determines by capital, and therefore capital will get the alpha and the labor gets what is left over. However, in the Islamic production function, each one of the stakeholders will go into the equation with their own rights. Why? Because Allah created everything. And regardless of the commodified value, regardless of the use value, everything that is created by Allah has its own inherited value, regardless of the commodified nature. So you cannot commodify, but regardless of that, everything that we have around us, including human, we have our own values. Capital will have its own value. Land will have its own value. And therefore, what is important in this relationship, because Allah created everything, and even if it goes to private property, the right of the society on the commons is essentialized by the Quran, by the zakat. So therefore, zakat is not a charity. It's part of the production function of Islam, in which whatever created by Allah is used by the private business to create wealth. And because of the ownership, everything that is around us belongs to Allah, the right of the society has to be taken out from the surplus value and given to society, to return to society as zakat. And therefore, when we look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, does not determine the return for human effort and land or other stakeholders, but tells us the normative position for that. But for the society, because Allah created everything, the right of the society on that, regardless of the private ownership, is through zakah, is essentialized. And therefore, as we can see in this production function, the importance of zakah as part of the endogenized nature of the production function, as well as the riba directly overcoming the domination of one factor, that's capital, over the others. So these are the conceptual ways of we have to look into value theory and distribution theory to contribute to the emergence of whole Islamic economics discourse in the process. There are quite a number of issues that want to discourse, but currently under the pressure of market system, unfortunately, we have been grafted from bottom up with the market system to develop our practices as well as theories according to the market system. And that is a mistake that we are doing. And in particular, looking at the crisis that we have around us, therefore, it is important for us to consider how an essentialist or substantivist methodological position can be taken to respond to the problems that we have around us. However, until now, the methodological position that has been hegemonic around us, very much the realist or formalist through fiqh, historical, just looking at the historical institutionalism, or behavioralist, considering that, look, economy is economy, individual is individual. No, the whole idea of Islamic normativeness is to shape the behaviors, shape the emerging institutions, and therefore providing the substantive nature to whatever economic and the financial activity that we have around us. And therefore, my objective here is just to give you certain imaginations, contribute to that process of imagination, how we can all work together to contribute to the theory building, so that rather than making all of us making ourselves terribly busy with the Islamic banking and finance data, which is also necessary, but not to put all the efforts into that, let's create an imagination. Let's create the future that is expecting us to contribute. At the end of the day, Muslims are supposed to be witness unto human beings. And therefore, moving out our current condition of being a shape without form, shade without color, is a paralyzed force, gesture without motion. Let's get out of that feeling and contribute to the emergence of this amazing world of Islamic moral economy, Islamic political economy, so that we can continue the light that has been fired by the founding fathers, how we can take that light further and contribute intellectually to development of that and practice, whether in Islamic bank and finance, whether it is importantly in the policy areas, in particular public policy making. That should be the objective, hopefully, that we should look into. And then, therefore, it is really time to say something new, and that something new has to be part of that becoming process and contributing new structure, new ways of doing things. And with that, I conclude, and thank you very much for your time.
Professor Asutay, thanks a lot for your presentation. Sorry that we have limited time, thus we cannot continue anymore. But thanks a lot for especially making connection between our current situations that we have been going through, both in economic and social aspects, and then having connection with them with the need of Islamic political economy or Islamic moral economy, which especially focuses on embeddedness, which I know that which is an important concept for you to especially underline. In terms of Islamic political economy. So thanks a lot again for Professor for the presentation. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. It's part of this process. Thank you. I'm happy to be part of this conference. Thank you for the time and thank you for everyone. Best wishes.
Have a nice day.